Imagine this, 4 a.m., sleeping Moscow. An American nuclear warhead of 200 kilotons detonates in the center of the metropolis at an altitude of 500 meters. Just in a blink, everything within a radius of 2 kilometers will be completely destroyed. 98% of people located at the epicenter of the explosion will die. Taking into account the population density of such a large city, this is approximately 120,000 deaths in a few seconds. In a radius of 2 kilometers to 11 kilometers, approximately every second person will die. That is another 500,000 lives. The total is 620,000 people, the population of Montenegro. Beyond the perimeter of the 11-mile zone, the main threat to people will be radiation. It is difficult to calculate the exact number of victims from radioactivity, but the consequences for Moscow will be catastrophic. Is such a scenario possible? According to the Russian president, yes. It was exactly the hypothesis of an impending sudden nuclear strike against the Russian Federation that he chose as a justification for his criminal war. According to Putin, the deployment of nuclear weapons on the territory of Ukraine reduced its flight time to Moscow. But if we assume that NATO is really preparing such an attack on Russia, we'll see that Ukrainian territory is not particularly suitable for it. Nobody will drop a couple of 100 kilotons on Russian capital waging a nuclear war. And it's not a matter of humanity, such a strike simply would be extremely ineffective. Because after it there will follow a strike with the whole Russian nuclear potential. And no country will be able to suppress Russia's response, including the US, so an attack from Moscow would simply result in mutual total annihilation. So this will not happen. But hold on. What if NATO will have a guarantee of no retaliatory strike from the Russian Federation? What if Russia simply will have nothing to retaliate with? This is exactly the idea behind the concept of the First Disarming Strike. In this strike, the United States planned to knock out up to 70% of Russia's nuclear missile capability, primarily ballistic missiles. This way the US would protect itself from a possible retaliatory nuclear strike from Russia. No. Naturally, such a scenario is mostly a conspiracy that Kremlin political pseudo-elite has adopted. But if this topic becomes a justification for a vile and aggressive war, then it is worth thinking, won't it turn out to be like in the boy who cried wolf parable? So, in a first disarming strike by NATO forces on Russian territory, the civilian infrastructure will not be of strategic importance. The main target is the nuclear forces of the Russian Federation. The exact coordinates of the location of part of the Russian nuclear triad are declassified thanks to New START Treaty, which implies permanent inspections of deployed and non-deployed strategic offensive weapons. In fact, some of this information is even in the public domain. These are the coordinates where the intercontinental ballistic missile silos are located. These areas, that are also regulated by START Treaty, are patrolled by transporter erector launchers as patrolled in these areas. The abbreviation is TEL. Naval strategic forces with missile submarine cruisers are stationed here and here. You and I are not considering strategic aviation bases because they cannot become retaliatory weapons due to their slow speed and because of the West's total superiority in fighter aircraft. The Russian bombers will be simply shot down. Most likely, they won't even have time to take off from their airfields before a nuclear blast hits them. Now, an important clarification: the number of missiles and, most importantly, the separable warheads that these missiles carry, are distributed unevenly across the designated points, of course. Tatishchevo and Lozelsk have a total of 78 silo-based missiles that carry 118 warheads. Depending on the type of missile, it may have several warheads that separate after the ICBM reaches orbit. These areas are patrolled by about 150 strategic mobile missile systems that carry a total of about 560 warheads. But Godseyevo, for example, is the basing point for Northern Fleet submarines, which carry SLBMs with an approximate number of warheads ranging from 400 to 600. So, in a hypothetical global disarming strike, the main and only targets for NATO would not be cities, but the enemy's strategic nuclear forces and military infrastructure. Because if a nuclear war breaks out, the main threat will be a retaliatory strike. Therefore, in the context of a nuclear attack by NATO, the Kola Peninsula is one of the highest priority targets. This is where most of Russia's nuclear-powered missile carriers are based. According to the so-called Bulletin of Nuclear Scientists, that's where a significant number of off-alert nuclear warheads are located. After Russia's attack on Ukraine, Google Maps stopped hiding such facilities on its satellite images. Totally, Russia has about 5,550 warheads, but only 1,625 are on alert. So in every respect, this Russian Kola Peninsula is one of the key ones in the issue of nuclear deterrence. Therefore, a small digression, to update the topic.
The security situation in Europe has changed, and we should not be naive when it comes to Russia. If Finland finally gives up its military neutrality, it will become largest NATO country in terms of the length of its common border with Russia, which is 1,340 kilometers.
See how interesting it is. Finland's joining NATO is an opportunity for the alliance in a matter of seconds to destroy approximately 25 to 35% of the Russian nuclear arsenal on standby. To destroy it without even the use of submarines. And as we will understand later, to implement the concept of a first disarming strike, NATO will need the maximum number of SSBNs available, because the surprise effect can be created either by submarines that can approach stealthily to Russian shores, or by a strike from adjacent territories that will reduce the flight time of nuclear warheads. And here is a true gift for NATO. Finland, that has been neutral for decades, joins the alliance because of the threat that truly comes from Russia. And now it is only 240 kilometers from Finland's Ilo airfield to Gadzievo. However, these are technical details as to what means it will be possible to deliver the warhead to the Russian Northern Fleet basing locations. It could even be American missile systems, which are already in service with Finland. All you need is ballistic missiles with a nuclear warhead. If we believe in the concept of NATO preparing the first disarming strike, which actually Putin spoke about, Finland's joining the alliance, opposite to Ukraine's joining, is indeed a very serious threat to Russia. But Putin has almost no reaction to this, because he understands perfectly that no one is going to attack Russia. And Ukraine is just his obsession. It is hardly possible to pose a threat to Russia's nuclear shield from Ukrainian territory. Of course, in theory it would be more convenient to strike at Thatishchev position area from Ukrainian territory, that's hard to deny. But that's a hypothetical threat of only 62 warheads, while Finland's joining NATO threatens the entire Russian fleet with hundreds of warheads, both to those ones in service and those that remain in storage. Also, it threatens Thaikovo position area with an undetermined number of tells. Moreover, after a preemptive strike against the Russian Northern Fleet, the Finnish armed forces could easily reach our 21 highway and completely cut off parts of Karelia and Murmansk Oblast from the rest of Russia. This might be necessary because we shouldn't think that the use of nuclear weapons guarantees that the side that was struck will surrender. There is no place for unfounded confidence. But Finnish army is not badly armed, more than 200 Leopard 2 tanks, 60 F-18, you can add to that 200 Swedish JAS-39 fighters. For comparison, Russia has 563 fighters, but particularly Leningrad military district is covered by only 120 Russian fighters. So, in this supposed theater of combat operations, only Sweden and Finland have a 2 times advantage over Russia in aviation. Finland, as well as Sweden, takes the potential threat posed by Russia seriously. In the end of last year, Helsinki and Washington signed a contract for the delivery of 64 F-35 next-generation fighter jets. The contract is worth about $10 billion. Guys, this video is not just about politics, it's a warning. It's important that more people become aware of where the world stands today. That's why I'm asking you to help me share this material. Please share this video with your friends, post it on social networks, give me a like, write a few comments, watch it again and subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much. But let's continue to outline the hypothetical possibility for the first disarming strike. Of course, simultaneously with the strikes on the Russian strategic fleet, 22 surfaced US and British submarines with 500 Trident II SLBMs on board in the northern waters of the Russian Federation strike Russian mobile missile launchers Yars and Topol as well as silo-based ballistic missiles. The Trident II missile can carry from 8 up to 14 warheads, depending on its power. So, theoretically, a single salvo from US and British submarines alone could drop from 4 to 7,000 warheads on Russia. Each of them is at least 5 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. But as we have mentioned above, their targets would not be civilian objects, but areas of concentration of the enemy's nuclear forces. First of all, these are underground missile silos with different degrees of protection. Most Russian underground missile silos have a high level of protection and are capable to withstand an explosion that forms a pressure of 5 to 10 megapascals. A megaton projectile, when detonated, generates a pressure of 10 megapascals within a radius of 385 meters. Circular error probable of Trident II is 90 meters, which gives a 50% probability that the warhead will hit the 90-meter radius circle. It is safe to say that 3 half-megaton warheads would be enough to destroy a missile silo. There are 320 to 340 missile silos in total in Russia. Accordingly, let's take the maximum number. Out of 5,000 warheads launched by NATO, 1,020 will be used against silo-based missile complexes. But there are still mobile complexes. Conventional weapons can also be used to destroy them, since the TELs are not protected in any way. But the use of shells without a nuclear warhead is possible only if the exact coordinates of the mobile complex are identified. And that's a problem. The combat patrolling area of Topol M is 125,000 square kilometers. That's the size of North Korea. Can NATO satellite systems track such an area in real time? The answer is obvious. It can't. And I would agree with you unless there is an artificial intelligence. It used to take a huge amount of time to process images from orbit earlier, but today artificial intelligence is used to analyze satellite photos of nature reserves to track poachers. Just think over it. Artificial intelligence uses photos from space to track poachers in the forest. Of course, the habitat of some endangered species is less than the area of 125,000 square kilometers, the territory which Topol M can patrol, but most likely these figures are exaggerated. One way or another, the mobile strategic complex needs roads, albeit unpaved ones. According to the New START Treaty, Russian mobile ICBM carriers patrol 6 areas, most of which do not have extensive road infrastructure, so space satellites only need to control the hypothetically suitable roads. All 150 TELS class Yars and Topol M class cannot move all the time. There are precise coordinates of some of their permanent deployment points, which means that a certain part may be in hangars during a massive strike. It's worth to mention that this giant thing needs to refuel every 200 kilometers, which means that the largest satellite constellation of NATO joint forces must control not so large network of unpaved and asphalt roads. The task of artificial intelligence will be to find a huge moving mobile unit with gasoline tanker constantly driving nearby. Of course, the problem remains nighttime. At this time, most satellites cannot recognize targets. During this period, the TEL can maneuver and remain invulnerable until dawn. But, as soon as sun rises, the visual detection satellites, which have the ability to view a given area from 15 to 20 minutes 2 or 3 times a day, will start searching for the target again. Let's assume that half of the existing TELs, and that's 75 vehicles, are on permanent deployment points and the rest are on combat duty. It's enough for space satellites to follow them through the day, and before sunset, at the moment when the first launches from SSBNs begin, the command will need to solve a simple math problem. The Topol M mobile missile launcher can travel 45 km per hour, and most likely such speed of travel is maximum possible speed on good autobahns. It is definitely slower on the country road. If you know the position of TEL an hour ago, it would not be difficult for you to calculate the area that has to be covered by nuclear warheads for 100% destruction of the mobile platform. Let's assume that you didn't keep the visual contact with the TEL for about an hour, then you need to cover an area of 6,000 square kilometers in order for your target to be hit. Approximately 20 half-megaton Trident II warheads have to be used to create a so-called low-damage zone over this entire area. Accordingly, 1,500 warheads are needed to destroy the 75 TELs on alert. And several dozen more warheads are needed to destroy the permanent locations of mobile strategic systems. As we remember, according to our very rough estimate, less than 3,000 warheads remain unexploded, which means that the task of the First Disarming Strike is feasible for NATO. And sorry for such wording. Naturally, we are modeling the situation without taking into account an enormous number of factors. We cannot calculate how many NATO ballistic missiles will be intercepted by the Russian missile defense system. Whether they will be ready to attack, whether the early warning radar system will work reliably, let's say in Vechhora, which, in fact, could be attacked by special operation forces even before a preemptive nuclear strike, which would seriously affect the ability to intercept NATO ballistic missiles. And we cannot calculate how long it will take the command to decide whether an attack on the missile warning system is another Ukrainian act of retaliation or the beginning of a nuclear war. Of course, we don't take into account that not all NATO submarines will be able to leave their bases, because China's satellite reconnaissance will most likely inform Russia that the SSBN's areas of basing are abandoned. And of course, we are not considering the speed of making decision to retaliate in the Kremlin. We don't know if the Russian silos will have time to get empty by the time the first NATO nuclear warheads arrive, whose flight time from the northern waters will be from 7 to 11 minutes. Will Putin be able to push that very button, or will the state security officer of the two most important suitcases in the country take the one in which the president's life products are stored? We also don't take into account the number of survived that will be able to hide from the satellite reconnaissance and conduct a retaliatory strike. Also, we don't take into account the number of Russian submarine missile carriers that at the moment of attack will be on alert in sea and will sail to the shores of USA after the first reports that their motherland was attacked. What also remains unresolved is the issue of Russian Pacific Ocean Fleet, which purely theoretically could be attacked from Japanese territory or by French SSBNs. Nor can we say how many Russian ICBMs that will be launched in response is considered acceptable for NATO, or rather how many intercontinental ballistic missiles NATO's EU radar system, that will be in full operational capability, will be able to destroy, since NATO and the US will be waiting for a retaliatory strike from Russia. Will the Aegis and TOD, which in theory should work against ballistic targets outside the atmosphere, perform as they should? Or will there be a strong rely on the second echelon of defense provided by Patriots? Yes, this is a game with a million unknowns, and it cannot a priori end in a victory for one side, given that Russian retaliatory strike will not be delivered against the US military infrastructure. Therefore, though this option is most likely being considered in the Pentagon offices, it cannot be viewed as a plan capable of solving Putin's Russia problem.
The island is so small that a single Sarmat missile would be enough to sink it once and forever. Everything has already been calculated. It's only one launch, Boris, and there's no England anymore.
This video is actually a blatant propaganda. Anti-war propaganda. Vladimir Putin has spent the last 8 years threatening the whole world with nuclear weapons, which is the only credible argument that Russia has. And the myth that an attack on Ukraine is a forced measure is easily shattered by reality. Indeed, in a hypothetical nuclear strike scenario, Ukraine's potential NATO membership threatens Russia 10 times less than Finland's membership. But Putin is not attacking Finland, and even at the highest diplomatic level he doesn't make any harsh statements. That is a direct evidence that the whole Kremlin bunch does not give a damn about the hypothetical security of their country.
We have nothing that could bother us in terms of Finland's or Sweden's membership in NATO. If they want to, they are welcome. They should clearly understand that there weren't any kind of threats to them before.
How the fans of Little Dictator do not notice these logical inconsistencies, I don't understand.
What's the most unbelievable is that the scenario in which all of this will eventually end in a nuclear strike seems to me more probable than the other developments.
Speeches of Russian propagandists, they are not just informational weapon, they are informational policy of the state, which is treated very cautiously in the West, especially after it became clear that Putin is making decisions based on a limited imperial worldview. And that extremely frightens the West. But nevertheless, you won't find a single piece on Western state channels smirking about how easily they can destroy Russian Federation. So, here I am, telling you how it could happen.
And we are the victims of aggression, and we will go to heaven as martyrs, and they will just die like animals.
No, I'll repeat, This scenario is highly unlikely, but now, pay attention. What if Western intelligence finds out that Putin is actually preparing to use nuclear weapons, just as it found out about the attack on Ukraine? What if for the West the option of a first disarming nuclear strike will be the only way to prevent global mutual destruction? What if, as Putin loves to say, he leaves NATO no other option?
As a citizen of Russia and head of the Russian state, I want to ask a question. Why do we need such a world, if there is no Russia there?
I'll be honest with you, I am frightened by this scenario. I am frightened by the fact that because of unpreparedness to acknowledge an error, one little dictator is able to draw the world to the point of no return. And, my friends, do you hear me? We should make every effort to prevent this. Because here we are really left with no choice to do otherwise except to be.